Hey guys, welcome back to this 8th grade American history. It is Thursday, May the 7th. We're going to pick up on this section here about George W. Bush, and we're going to read from 387 to 390 today, picking up at America United post 9/11 events. September 11th changed the United States in many ways. Right after the attack, a renewed patriotism and spiritual concern swept the nation. At this time, Republicans and Democrats alike were united in this cause. Ball games were canceled, and churches were filled with Americans praying for their country and for the grieving families who lost loved ones during the attack. Americans donated blood, time, and money in their outreach to others during this desperate time. People showed up at Ground Zero, the site of the collapsed World Trade Center, and volunteered to dig through the rubble in the hopes of finding survivors. One immediate effect was a drop in the stock market. When the New York Stock Exchange reopened its doors a week after the attack, stock values plunged. Investors simply lacked confidence in the economy. No one knew what to expect in the days ahead. However, as the Bush administration dealt boldly and swiftly with the threat to America, confidence returned. And by the end of the year, the market was on the road to recovery. One of President Bush's responses to 9/11 was to create the Department of Homeland Security, a new executive department to promote the safety of the American people and the security of their homeland. The formation of the DHS was the largest reorganization to take place in the federal government in over 50 years. And Bush begins what is known as the War on Terror. President Bush had vowed that America would not rest until the terrorists responsible for 9/11 were brought to justice. Before a joint session of Congress, Bush called for a military campaign against not only the terrorists themselves, but also the nations that gave them shelter and aid. This military campaign was commonly known as the Bush Doctrine. Congress responded with overwhelming support, and the War on Terror began. At a commencement speech at the United States Military Academy at West Point, Bush first stated that the United States had the right to preemption in an effort to defend itself. In a preemptive strike, an army strikes its enemy before waiting for the enemy to strike first. The war commenced in Afghanistan and was eventually named Operation Enduring Freedom. So let's look at Afghanistan first. One of the first targets of the war against terrorism was the Taliban, a strict Islamic regime governing Afghanistan. Knowing that the Taliban had sheltered bin Laden in the past and continued to shelter al-Qaeda terrorists, the Bush administration gave Taliban leaders an ultimatum: surrender the al-Qaeda terrorists at once or face military action. The Taliban refused to surrender the terrorists, and the United States bombed Taliban targets, particularly those where al-Qaeda terrorists might be hiding. By January 2002, the U.S. Air Force controlled the skies above Afghanistan, and American Special Forces had launched a ground assault against the Taliban. As suspected, hundreds of al-Qaeda terrorists were captured and killed in the invasion. Unfortunately, though, bin Laden remained in hiding. Next, the Bush administration turned to another nation known to have harbored and supported Islamic terrorists, Iraq. Governed by dictator Saddam Hussein, Iraq had been under suspicion since in the early 1990s, when it was discovered that Iraq was stockpiling weapons of mass destruction. In fact, the Iraqi dictator had used chemical weapons in wars with Iran and against the Kurds of northern Iraq, and even using it on his own people to test, killing more than 25,000 people. Following the Persian Gulf War, UN weapons inspectors found and destroyed several tons of chemical weapon materials, as well as long-range missiles and chemical warheads. In March 2003, President Bush announced that Operation Iraqi Freedom had been launched to invade Iraq and remove Hussein from power. Within a month, the Hussein regime had toppled, and the dictator had gone into hiding. President Bush vowed to bring democracy to the Iraqi people and help them build a stable government. U.S. troops stayed in Iraq to maintain order until a new democratically elected government could be established. By December 2003, Saddam Hussein was captured, and it seemed that our Operation Iraqi Freedom was on the slow road to success. So let's look at some other national concerns. Though the war on terrorism was the primary focus of the Bush administration, it was by no means the only crisis to demand the president's attention. Bush labeled nations that aided terrorist acts and sought weapons of mass destruction as the axis of evil. These nations were Iraq, Iran, and North Korea. The communist government of North Korea alarmed world leaders in 2002 when it admitted to breaking the pledge it had made in 1994 to freeze all nuclear development. Before the end of 2003, the North Koreans announced that they had achieved nuclear missile capabilities. So now let's learn about the 2004 election. As the presidential election of 2004 approached, the conflict in Iraq was a key issue. Many people in government and in the media voiced their opposition to U.S. involvement in Iraq. Anti-war protesters demonstrated in American cities, and certain celebrities even denounced President Bush and his policies on national television. However, the invasion of Iraq was ordered with congressional approval. Most Democrats in Congress, though they were against Bush now, had voted with their Republican colleagues to support the president's call to action, including the Democratic candidate for president in 2004, Senator John Kerry of Massachusetts. President Bush and Senator Kerry campaigned across the country through the summer of 2004, promoting their visions for America. However, the two candidates took such distinctly different positions on the issues of abortion, taxes, spending, and of course the war in Iraq that for many Americans the choice was simple. The media followed both campaigns closely and projected a victory for Senator Kerry right up to the day of the election. But as the votes were counted, the people's choice became clear and George W. Bush won a second term. To the surprise of his critics, the president had received the majority of the popular vote as well as the electoral vote. This time there were no disputes or recounts. So let's look at some challenges at home. When the ailing Chief Justice William Rehnquist died in September 2005, Bush appointed federal judge John G. Roberts to be the 17th Chief Justice of the United States. A month later, President Bush nominated federal judge Samuel Alito soon after Justice Sandra Day O'Connor retired from the court. Controversy over Alito's nomination ensued as Democrats in the Senate fought to oppose his nomination, saying that he was too conservative and would upset the balance of the court. When, after weeks of debate and hearings, Alito's confirmation came to the floor of the Senate, Democrats, led by Senator John Kerry and Ted Kennedy of Massachusetts, staged a filibuster, or a speech intended to postpone legislative action. In the end, Alito's supporters in the Senate managed to bring his appointment to a final vote, with Alito being confirmed in late January 2006. President Bush wanted to find a way of dealing with the flow of illegal aliens, especially those crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. Americans felt challenged by illegal aliens, especially those who were receiving health benefits. With the increase of illegal aliens, government finances were drained, crimes involving drugs were committed, property of U.S. citizens was damaged, and Americans were killed. President Bush wanted to grant amnesty or pardon some who had committed a crime to these illegal aliens. However, many disagreed with him, saying that granting amnesty to illegal aliens would reward the people who had broken the law and only encourage others to break the law so they would be granted amnesty. Furthermore, amnesty had already been tried in 1986 when an immigration bill was passed with the hopes that amnesty would lead to a reduction of illegal immigrants. The result, of course, was just the opposite. More immigrants came in illegal than legally. President Bush's immigration bill did not pass through Congress. However, Bush did take steps to reduce the number of illegal aliens crossing the U.S. southern border by increasing the number of border agents by 30% and signing the Secure Fence Act in 2006. This act authorized the building of a fence along the U.S.-Mexico border to reduce the number of illegal aliens entering the United States. Lastly, let's look at some more foreign policy. Many people criticize the Bush administration for its management of the conflict in Iraq and for the mounting number of American and Iraqi casualties. Every day, insurgents committed cruel acts of terrorism against the U.S. troops and Iraqi people, but the president remained committed to helping Iraq build a democratic republic. Like many Americans, he realized that such an accomplishment would not only benefit Iraq, but also promote the security of the United States. In January 2005, the efforts of the brave American soldiers in Iraq paid off when the Iraqis held their first free election in 50 years. Many walked for miles just to cast their ballots. The struggle for stability in Iraq continued, but a great step toward freedom had been taken. One of Bush's greatest accomplishments was the leadership he provided in the development of missile defense, the ability of a missile to destroy a launched missile before it reached its intended target. President Reagan was the first president to start these steps, and George W. Bush completed it. This was known as the Star Wars program. And then his project, George W. Bush's project, was called Defensive Shield. And it took decisive action when he withdrew from the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty in spite of the protests from Russia's President Vladimir Putin. Throughout most of Bush's time in office, the Republican Party was in control of the Congress. However, after his election in 2004, Bush's popularity with the American people began to decline greatly. This gave the Democrats the opportunity to criticize many of Bush's policies. When the 2006 midterm congressional elections rolled around, the Democrats secured a majority in both House and Congress, which gave them the control of who would be the next Speaker of the House. They chose Nancy Pelosi, the first woman Speaker of the House. Both Congress and the Supreme Court challenged the president on the status of prisoners of war being held at the American military base at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Since the 9/11 attacks on the United States, several combatants had been detained because they were considered to have been fighting against the United States during the War on Terror. The Bush administration argued that these combatants could be denied the right of trial and could be held indefinitely for the duration of the war, based on the fact that Guantanamo Bay was not within the ruling authority of the United States. However, the Supreme Court ruled in a series of cases that jurisdiction could be extended to Guantanamo Bay, therefore giving the combatants a right to trial. These court cases also extended the right to trial for both American citizens and non-citizens fighting against the United States once they were captured. Toward the end of his term, President Bush was attacked by both Democrats and Republicans, even though there had not been another domestic terror attack. Some felt that Bush had failed in the war against terror because he had failed to capture Osama bin Laden. Furthermore, the U.S. national debt increased to the level of $1 trillion. As a result, many began to abandon their support for Bush and look toward another leader as the 2008 presidential election approached. And that ends today's lesson, guys. Make sure on page 390 you do the section review today, odd number only. And I'll see you guys tomorrow on Friday. Take care.